We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a real pleasure to welcome singer, songwriter, and activist Billy Bragg to the program. Billy, welcome to the program.
Hi, Sam. How's things?
Things are great. I got to tell you, this is a huge honor for me. I first saw you over maybe close to 35 years ago. You performed at my college, and it was back in the 80s, and you were a big, important force in my musical development and my political consciousness. So I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you.
Thanks for sharing that, Sam. I appreciate it too.
So you've written a pamphlet entitled "The Three Dimensions of Freedom." This is part of a series. Is that right?
It is, yes. My publishers, Faber, they're called Faber Social. They're part of Faber Faber, and they specialize in books about music or books written by musicians. They published my skiffle book in 2017, the Roots, Radicals, and Rockers. And last year they said they're going to start this program of putting out these. They're kind of like polemical essays. Mine is about 17,000 words. It's about a 90-minute read. And they were asking me if I had anything I'd like to write about. And the Three Dimensions of Freedom focuses on the necessity to that equality and accountability must be present in order for us really to be free. That liberty alone, free speech alone, is not enough to guarantee everybody's freedom. And it's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I've written songs about it. I've spoken about it at events, and this gave me an opportunity to draw all of my thoughts together, particularly in the light of the election of Donald Trump and the Brexit in the UK.
Yeah, and I should say, I mean, you manage in that this brief essay to move from Mount Pelerin to Gamergate to Joe Rogan gets a mention, all the way to Brexit.
I think I'm trying to work on a number of levels. You know, the basic premise that freedom demands both liberty, the right to express your opinion, equality, your responsibility to respect other people's opinions, and then accountability. That's the absolute key one. I'm trying to bring that to bear not just on the politics of the day, how we deal with the rise of authoritarianism in democratic societies, but I'm also trying to give people some parameters with which to monitor their social media discourse, to be able to try and work out if the person they're dealing with online is acting in good faith, whether they are willing to give equal space to your opinion that you're expressing, and more importantly, whether they are willing to be accountable for what they've said and what their actions are. And I think it's the lack of accountability, the lack of respect for equality online that undermines so much of our the deliberation that goes on online, and that's why I'm trying to offer some parameters for that, as well as talking about the major politics that are going on in the world.
Yeah, and I thought you did a great job of that, frankly, and that's a beat that we spend a lot of time on. But let's just start. I want to just start to just talk a little bit about the concept of liberty, because I mean I couldn't help but be reminded in this, just sort of, I guess, I imagine this was you did this consciously, the Three Dimensions of Freedom, sort of in some respects echoing FDR's Four Freedoms speech, where he was, not redefining, but I guess more specifically defining what this concept means, and essentially taking it away from the right and allowing people to get a better perspective on it. And like you say, the need for accountability runs through all three of these sectors. But let's just talk a little bit more about this notion about economic liberty, like so-called economic liberty, because that is ostensibly what the right would have us believe this is about. But in fact, their notion of economic liberty really clouds the actual notion of liberty itself.
I think it does, because their idea of liberty is the right to exploit. And I mean, obviously that's a key aspect of capitalism. But when you get to a situation where that is not regulated in any way, that's when it becomes dangerous. Capitalism, ultimately, I believe, is like fire. If you tend it, if you keep looking on it, it will give you heat and it will give you light. If you leave it untended, it will destroy everything in its path. And I'm afraid for the last 40 years, since Reagan and Thatcher, we've lived in a time where capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, has been deregulated constantly, and politicians have argued that the market has the answer to all of our problems. Now, when a politician says that, they are shirking the accountability that goes along with democracy. People think that democracy and accountability are synonymous, but I'm afraid they're not always synonymous. Their relationship is more like a Venn diagram. And there's sometimes when there's consensus in a society, that Venn diagram is overlaps, most of it overlaps. But at the moment, under Donald Trump and with Brexit in my country, I'm afraid accountability and democracy are going in different directions. You live in a country where the person who gets the most votes in the election doesn't win. I live in a country where a tiny majority vote for a huge constitutional change, and we're not allowed to question it or challenge it. So these are difficult times for those of us who believe that democracy is absolutely crucial, but unfortunately it's become untethered from its ability to hold those in power to account, whether they're politicians or, more difficult, whether they're buried deep within corporations.
Well, what do you think about the notion, and maybe this is just on my mind, we interviewed Bhaskar Sankara yesterday, who's the editor of Jacobin, and on his socialist manifesto. And what do you think, to extend that metaphor about fire, what do you think about the notion that, the argument that I think that he was making on this program was that you can control the fire, and you can make sure that it's being used for its proper purposes. And if you don't, obviously it'll consume everything. But his argument, I think, would be that the existence of that much flame is inherently problematic and will always get out of control. And, you'll have periods of time where you can control it, but at other times you won't. And you get what we've had over the past 40 years and counting. And that, from his perspective, the idea is that maybe we need to snuff out much of that fire. Maybe some embers are okay, but you got to keep away everything that is dry from it.
People have been talking about that for a long time, and I've been involved in movements that have been focused on that. But before we snuff it out, we've got to make sure we're not snuffing it out into darkness. We need to see what the light will be once we've snuffed out the fire. And until we're able to show people what the light will be when we snuff out the fire of capitalism, they're going to be understandably rather sort of doubtful about the validity of that. So we have a little bit of a way to go. I'd like to think of it more in the sense that accountability is, or the other way around, maybe socialism is another name for accountability. And what I mean by that is what the UAW are currently doing. They're organizing, they're going on strike for greater agency in the workplace, to have some say over their wages and their conditions in the workplace. When ordinary working people have organized, it's always been for greater accountability in the workplace. And in my country, the Labour Party grew out of the union movement. So I think it's really accountability that we bring to bear on capitalism that then actually ensures that it works for the benefit of the people and stops that exploitative edge that as socialists we're always trying to combat. I've never been a revolutionary. I've always been someone who's tried to reconcile the contradictions within the system and within human nature. And what I'm trying to do with this book is identify accountability and equality, but specifically accountability as the key component that we need for individual agency, because I think both the election of Donald Trump and Brexit are manifestations of ordinary working people feeling they no longer have agency over their lives.
And I have to say, to that end, I really appreciated the part two. When you talk about equality, and you're specifically, in some respects, talking about the freedom in addressing the right's sort of ongoing project of essentially saying that if you criticize us, you are stifling our free speech, while at the same time, in attacking what they call political correctness. At one point, you talk about Eric Weinstein, who is the guy who coined the phrase IDW, is someone I've actually spoken to briefly, at least. And you write, in his refusal to recognize the reciprocal nature of freedom, that you must respect in others the rights that you claim for yourself, Weinstein reveals that the intellectual dark web to be a party to the strain of irate exceptionalism that runs through the new generation of free speech warriors. What do you mean by that, the strain of irate exceptionalism?
Well, they believe that they should be able to say whatever they want to say, whenever they want to say it, to whomever they want to say, with no comeback. And that's not free speech that they're trying to get there. That's free reign that they want. And when people do come back at them, they complain terribly, and they say something outrageous, and then they say, "Oh, I'm not allowed to say this." You've already said it, mate. This is ridiculous. Stop clutching your pearls. You're already there. And they do have the right to say that. I respect Eric's right to say whatever he wants to say, but equally, he has to respect my right to hold him to account for what he says, because free speech without equality is nothing more than privilege. If you don't respect the right of others to criticize what you're saying, and this is important, respect their view when you go back to them and when you speak to them. In the book, I take a quote by Eric where he talks about how open to debate they are, and then immediately says, except people who believe this, we're not going to talk to them at all because they don't work on the same level as we do. You can't. That's not how free speech works. He's trying to narrow that down, and that's what concerns me about the new generation of free speech warriors. It's not free speech they want; it's free reign that they want, and I'm afraid that's not how freedom works.
And I mean, it's I guess I appreciate your addressing this, because I think this is something that particularly young people and who come online. I think, specifically when you talk about folks like Jordan Peterson and this crew and Joe Rogan, I mean, you're talking about young men largely and or older boys, and there are very few voices out there who are making the point you are making to those people who come and you sit down there, you watch these guys, they're all sitting there, they're all nodding their heads to each other, and you presume, well, they must be right because they're all in agreement. And it's important to have this, I guess, intervention.
Well, I mean, we're all capable of doing that, Sam. Even on the left, we're capable of doing that, to get out of our bubble. What I'm trying to give young people is, well, left or right, are parameters in which to be able to have a discourse that you learn something from, that is beneficial, that doesn't descend to 100% universal agreement or anger or bullying, abuse. You have the right to offend, but you don't have the right to abuse. And I'm afraid the modern concept of free speech doesn't really take the idea that there are parameters on board. Let's take, for example, so I actually quote this in the book. It's something that George Orwell said, and it is that if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they don't want to hear. Now, the problem with that is that by saying that, Orwell is saying actually it's okay to say 2 + 2 = 5, which is the example that he gives in 1984 about how the system is so bad, because if everybody is allowed to say anything they want to say, if you've only got a liberty and equality, and anyone can say whatever they like, then you still aren't able to focus in on the fundamental truth of any particular matter. That's why you need accountability. Right. That's why accountability is the line we have to draw in the sand, whatever our politics, and say, this is where we're going to make our stand. We're going to hold you to account. If you are lying to us, we are going to hold you to account for your lies. And we've got to keep focused on on that idea of accountability, whether we're talking to the President of the United States, the European Commission, or some toe rag who's having a go at you on Twitter.
I mean, that lack of accountability feels to me to be the sort of and I think you expressed this in your essay, in the years running up to Donald Trump. I mean, and you know, these are obviously problems that have that well preexisted Donald Trump. But in the years running up, there was a greater awareness, it seems to me. I mean, I have hosted many people over the past 10 years prior to Trump talking about two tiers of justice, talking about the failure to hold the banks accountable for what happened in 2008. The idea that, you know, I mean, just Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, just you can find examples across, frankly, Donald Trump, Steve Mnuchin, half the people in the administration. They exist because there has been a failure for society in a myriad of ways to hold people accountable. There's been two or multiple systems of justice that have not been applied equally.
I mean, this is what I'm trying to get at with the book. You know, this is the thing that over a long period of me looking at the situation, I've identified as the hole in the donut, if you will, the lack of accountability. Because the great struggle, it seems to me, in a modern democratic society. And this is what underpins what you Americans refer to as the culture wars. And that is the struggle that answers the question of, one, who gets to write the rules, and two, and this is most important of all, who gets to break them and get away with it. And that clash right there underpins the whole narrative of political correctness. When Donald Trump identified in the Democratic nomination process and one of the debates, the greatest problem that America faced is political correctness. I mean, political correctness, you know, it doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as political correctness. It is a trope that is used by reactionaries to police the limits of social change, to stop things happening that they don't feel comfortable with. There's no set of intellectuals writing theses on the ideology of political correctness. There's no people marching on the streets demanding more of it. There's no party trying to get elected on a platform of political correctness. It is a complete chimera. It doesn't exist whatsoever. And yet Trump is able to say it's the greatest challenge that America faces today. I mean, this is how ridiculous we've got in the discourse. And of course, the idea that he's doing that, and it was in answer to a question where he was asked about his behavior towards women. So he was literally using that trope to avoid accountability. And that's where the problem lies. I think wherever you hear that phrase being used, political correctness, virtue signaling, any of these tropes, you have to ask what the person using them is trying to deflect you away from.
Right. I mean, this is simply a reaction to the idea that a certain person or a certain group is essentially saying, like, hey, wait a second, I'm drawing boundaries here. And these are boundaries that the people who are complaining about political correctness have never had to observe in the past.
Yeah, I mean, look at all the dynamic campaigns that have arisen over the past 5 years. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, what we call in England Extinction Rebellion, the protests against the climate change. I mean, these are all accountability movements. These are all movements that are seeking to hold people to account for their sexism, for their misogyny, for their racism, for their disrespect for the environment. Accountability is the cutting edge these days of our politics, and unfortunately, the way that your politics is set up with such a polarized Congress and Senate, it's impossible for those accountability to work, because there's that rejection of any kind of being held to account within the system itself. That's where the problem is.
Well, to the extent that, I mean, there is some addressing of that accountability. You see movements like you say, Black Lives Matter or Me Too movement, or, at one point, like the Occupy movement, I think was a similar moment of accountability. What what else can we create as vehicles for accountability beyond that? Or is that simply just we need to reinvent those same movements, continually?
Well, it works on a lot of different levels, Sam. It's not a one-size-fits-all simple answer. And I'm not offering answers in my book. I'm offering parameters with which to judge the person that you're encountering, the politics you're encountering. In the 20th century, we had ideology to do this. Whatever your ideology was, left or right, you could use that ideology to look at a debate and work out whether you're in favor of it or against it. You could get your bearings, if you like, on the debate. We've kind of lost that with the decline of ideology. And what I'm trying to offer with the book is the reason I said dimensions is because I do want to try and create a space where the two sides can talk to each other, where we can overcome polarization with deliberation, with respect for one another. Because I think that's one of the things that really is lacking in the debate, any respect that the person who is arguing with you might be coming from a position which is justified, but just happens to be different to yours. So what I'm looking at in the book is a recognition of accountability and equality as being these two key principles that we bring to our personal discourse with one another, but also to the way that we see the world. And so that we recognize that the debate we're going to have is going to happen within this space. Because, there's a lot of talk with free speech warriors about the idea of safe spaces. Now, a safe space is set up to ensure that there is a debate, not to close down the debate, but to ensure that there is a debate. It's just that if you come into that safe space, you have to respect the person you're arguing with. You have to listen to them, you have to let them speak, and you have to accept if they're holding you to account for something that you're saying is outrageous. And unfortunately, your average free speech warrior doesn't want that. They want to go in there and they want to offend as many people as possible to the limits of I would argue, abusive behavior. And then they want a reaction, they get one, and then they make themselves into the victim. And it's almost always, I hate to say this, it's almost always white men who do this because they're desperate for a bit of victimhood. Because they realise that their privileged position in society has left them at the moment in a situation where they're having to respond, rightly so, to Black Lives Matter, to Me Too, to the driving gas guzzlers with the climate school strikers. So this is the respect that you need to come into a safe space is. I prefer that much more to Eric Weinstein's idea of debate in which he's not going to talk to the people he doesn't agree with. I mean, how does that help bring anything forward? How does that help Eric widen the scope of his ideas even? Never mind me arguing with him, but in his sense, it's no good for him if he only talks to people he agrees with.
If in fact he is interested in widening those ideas, which you've got
to think that if you've got, I've written a book because I want a platform to talk about these things with people like yourself. And I'd be happy to go and debate this with Eric. I'd be happy to go and talk about this on Joe Rogan because I'd be, it's a terrible thing to say, Sam, but I might learn something.
Right.
They might have a perspective on free speech that I haven't picked up because of where I'm coming from. And they may say something that allows me then to go away and sharpen my idea. That's what discourse is about, mate.
Right.
That's how you learn stuff. You don't learn it by sticking your fingers in your ear and saying la 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 when someone is trying to give you a different perspective of your position. These guys want the license to say whatever they like. They're not interested in the liberty that allows us that fabulous right that people have struggled through the years to express your opinion and then to put it into the marketplace of opinions. They're not interested in the marketplace of opinions. Like the neoliberalists they are, they want to dominate the marketplace and they don't want any competition. For capitalists, they're a very, very bad example, I have to say.
Yes, well, indeed. Although I guess, like you write in the book, those guys at Mont Pelerin would have been proud.
That's right. Yeah.
So, Billy, are there going to be more pamphlets to find this? And people, obviously, this is out there now. And also, I should just tell people, just as a public service, that you're going to be You're on tour right now. I know you're in Virginia, and soon you're going to be up here in New York next weekend. Then
Bowery, yep.
And then up in Cambridge, Mass.
I'm doing some. I'm actually, if people are interested, I'm doing some book-related events. I'll be at the Brooklyn Public Library in New York City talking about the book next week, and I'll also be in the Cambridge Public Library. If you get in touch with them, the Cambridge event is on the 1st of October, and the Free Library of Philadelphia on the 23rd, so that's next Monday. And then I'm in New York City at the Brooklyn Public Library on the 25th of October talking about this.
On the 25th?
Again, as I say, the 25th of September at the Brooklyn Public Library. Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! Is going to be talking to me about the book. Oh. And it's interesting because in the Q&A afterwards, I pick up, because obviously, I'm sure you know that there's a different perspective on free speech in the US as there is in Europe. Right. We have slightly different perspectives on hate speech and other issues. So it's always interesting to come as a European and to talk to Americans about this, to get that other perspective that allows me then to see if I can then articulate what I'm trying to say in a way that makes sense with the American definition of free speech, different though it is.
Well, I will be there. I'm going to be there. If that's Wednesday night at the Brooklyn Library, I will be there, and I'm looking forward to it. Billy, thank you so much. I can't tell you, a real honor and a pleasure for me to have this opportunity to talk to you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to your listeners and your viewers. I hope it made sense to them.
I would hope so. All right, I appreciate it. Thanks again.
All the best, Sam. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That was fun. It is weird to have a conversation with the guy that you saw and admired for the first time 35 years ago.
Yeah. And then to talk about Eric Weinstein.
And then to be like, spend that much time talking about Eric Weinstein.